You're sitting in a circle. The fire's low. Someone across from you just said something about you to the wrong person. And within a day, the whole camp knows a secret you never wanted told. In your world, that's awkward. Maybe a bad week, a few uncomfortable conversations, someone unfollowing you online. In theirs, it could get you exiled, mutilated, sometimes killed. Because gossip wasn't gossip to ancient tribal societies, it was infrastructure. And betraying it wasn't rude. It was treason. Here's what nobody tells you about small hunter-gatherer and tribal groups. Your survival depended entirely on trust. Not romantic trust, structural trust. Who you hunted with, who watched your children while you gathered food, who you shared meat with during a bad season, knowing they'd share back when your own luck ran out. In a group of 30 to 150 people, which is roughly the size anthropologists believe most human social groups naturally settled into for most of our history, there was no police force, no courts, no anonymity to disappear into. The only enforcement mechanism available was reputation, and reputation ran entirely on talk. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, famous for identifying that upper limit on stable human relationships now called Dunbar's number, has argued that language itself likely evolved largely as a way to track exactly this. Who's trustworthy? Who's not? Who did what to whom, and when, and why it matters. Before language, primates maintained social bonds through physical grooming, one relationship at a time, picking through fur for hours. It doesn't scale. You can't groom 80 people, but you can talk to several of them at once around a fire and update your entire mental map of who's reliable and who isn't in a single evening. Gossip, in this framing, wasn't a character flaw. It was the actual operating system of small-scale human society, which meant a person who leaked the wrong secret, who broke a confidence that held the group together, wasn't committing a minor social sin. They were corrupting the exact system everyone in the group depended on to know who was safe to trust with their food, their children, their life. So what happened to them? The mildest and probably most common response across history was ostracism. Simple, brutal, devastatingly effective. You stopped being spoken to, stopped being included in the hunt, stopped being fed when food was short. In a small, mobile group with no safety net, no backup community to run to, social exile could function as a death sentence without anyone ever laying a hand on you. Cold, slow, and almost invisible from the outside. Just a person quietly starving at the edge of a group that used to be theirs. But some societies went considerably further than silence. And this is where things get genuinely brutal, because we actually have written legal codes documenting specific, codified punishments for betrayal through speech. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest surviving legal codes on Earth, dating to roughly 1754 BC in ancient Babylon, includes provisions punishing people who brought false accusations against others. If you accused someone of a capital crime and couldn't prove it, the punishment for the false accusation was death, the exact fate the falsely accused would have faced. Say the wrong thing about the wrong person, and the consequence didn't just fall on them. It boomeranged directly back onto you, in equal and exact measure. Even more specific and honestly more unsettling is the Manusmriti, an ancient Indian legal and social text with roots stretching back over 2,000 years. It prescribes explicit physical punishments for slander and false witness, including, in the certain codified circumstances, mutilation of the tongue for repeated or severe offenses. The reasoning wasn't subtle or symbolic in some abstract sense. It was almost mechanically literal. The tongue did the damage. The tongue paid the price. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you. This wasn't some isolated cultural oddity, a one-off practice from a single strange legal tradition. Punishing the literal physical instrument of betrayal, the mouth, the tongue, sometimes the ears for those who spread overheard secrets, shows up independently across multiple unrelated legal and tribal traditions in the ancient world. Different continents, different centuries, different religions, languages, and social structures with zero contact with each other. And yet, the same underlying logic keeps reappearing. Identify the body part responsible for the crime and let the punishment fall specifically there. That kind of convergence, the same idea showing up over and over in places that couldn't possibly have copied each other, usually means something deeper is going on. Not a shared rule book, a shared instinct. Now, here's the twist most people miss when they picture ancient justice. The harshest tribal punishments weren't usually reserved for outsiders. They were reserved for insiders. A stranger betraying you was almost expected. Painful, maybe dangerous, but expected, because you never trusted them fully in the first place. A member of your own group, though, someone who shared your fire, your food, your children's safety, doing the same thing, that wasn't just painful, that was existential. It meant the wall protecting you had a hole in it that came from inside the wall itself. Ethnographic studies of small-scale societies across Africa, the Americas, and the Pacific Islands have consistently documented this exact asymmetry. Punishments for internal betrayal running noticeably harsher than punishments for comparable external threats. An outside enemy could only ever hurt you from outside. Someone inside your own circle could hurt you while you slept, while your back was turned, while you trusted them completely. The threat model was fundamentally different, and so was the punishment. This is where corporal punishment, specifically tied to speech, shows up again and again in the ethnographic record. Not universally, not in every tribe, not as some monolithic global practice, but recurring often enough across cultures with no contact with one another to suggest something deeper than coincidence or cultural borrowing. In several documented tribal legal systems recorded by anthropologists over the past 2 centuries, physical punishment for spreading damaging falsehoods or breaking sworn confidences ranged from public beating and forced labor to banishment with a permanent physical mark identifying the offense, to, in extreme and specifically codified cases, mutilation targeting the exact body part associated with the crime. Most often the tongue, sometimes the ears, for those who listened in on things they had no right to hear and then spread what they'd heard. We have to be honest here about the limits of what we actually know, because this is exactly the kind of topic where it's easy to overstate the evidence for dramatic effect. Direct physical evidence, meaning actual skeletal remains showing deliberate tongue or ear mutilation specifically and provably tied to slander, as opposed to warfare, disease, or other forms of punishment entirely, is genuinely rare and extremely difficult to attribute with certainty from bones alone. Bones don't come with a label explaining why an injury happened. Much of what we actually know comes from written legal codes and from ethnographic accounts recorded by outside observers, missionaries, colonial administrators, and later trained anthropologists, documenting practices they witnessed or were told about, not directly from the deep prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies this video opened with around that fire. So the honest, complete answer looks something like this. We know with real confidence that betrayal through speech was treated as one of the most serious offenses a person could commit in small-scale societies, serious enough to threaten someone's entire place within the group. We know multiple independent legal traditions, separated by geography and centuries, prescribed mutilation specifically targeting the organ responsible for the offense. What we genuinely can't say with certainty is exactly how far back this specific practice extends, or how universally it applied across every tribal society that ever existed. The deep prehistoric record, tens of thousands of years back, simply doesn't preserve that kind of behavioral detail the way it preserves stone tools or hearths. And maybe that uncertainty is actually the most interesting part of the whole story. Because it means the instinct itself, the idea that betraying group trust deserves a punishment matched precisely and specifically to the crime, is so old, so consistent, and so independently reinvented across completely unrelated cultures with no possible contact between them, that it starts to look less like one specific historical legal practice and more like something close to a recurring, almost universal human response to broken trust. Different people, different continents, different eras, arriving again and again at the same brutal conclusion on their own. There's something worth sitting with in that. Modern life has largely removed the physical stakes from gossip. Nobody's tongue is at risk today for repeating something they shouldn't have. But the underlying social machinery hasn't actually changed nearly as much as we'd like to think. A damaging rumor can still end a career. A broken confidence can still end a friendship permanently. Reputation, even now in a world of courts and laws and formal contracts, still quietly runs an enormous amount of human life behind the scenes. So the next time gossip spreads about you and it stings, and you catch yourself thinking about how unfair modern social consequences can feel, consider this. Somewhere in your evolutionary and cultural past, that exact same betrayal, the same broken confidence, the same whispered word to the wrong person could have cost someone their tongue, or their place by the fire, or eventually their life. Talk was never just talk. It was the thing holding the entire group together when nothing else could. And breaking it was one of the very few crimes that ancient humans, across wildly different continents and centuries, kept independently agreeing deserved to hurt.